from the air age, through the missile age, and into the age of space. Our space age heritage of knowledge is older than a decade, older than a century, older than a millennium. Our scientific knowledge has evolved through the ages concurrently with the minds of men. Our capacity to learn has expanded in the process. The challenging idea of exploring beyond our planetary boundaries is as old as history, probably as old as humanity itself. Concepts of the universe have changed, just as our knowledge of the Earth itself has changed. Compress the entire history of the Earth into 1 year. On this time scale, 8 months of the year would be devoid of life. During the succeeding 2 months, simple bacteria would come into existence. Mammals would not appear until the second week in December. Man would walk into the scene at 11:45 p.m. on December 31st. Recorded history would account for but the final ticks of the clock. Man's aerospace achievements, little more than the flicker of an eyelash. Hic deficit orbis. Here ends the world. So said an ancient map inscribed at the Pillars of Hercules. The two-dimensional world of early history was narrow, because man's knowledge of his environment was narrow. Ptolemy, for 1,000 years considered to be the greatest authority on astronomy, placed the Earth at the center of the universe. Copernicus, in 1543, advanced the idea that the sun was at the center of the planetary orbits, identified the Earth as one of these planets. Kepler, in the 17th century, described his 3 great laws of planetary motion, setting a pattern for the study of the solar system. Galileo, 17th century inventor of the telescope, who opened a new window to the skies with a device that could look at both sides of the present, using the antique light from distant stars to chart future voyages into space. Newton, who said of his 3rd law of motion, "This is the principle that will enable mankind in later centuries to undertake flights to the stars." Montgolfier, 2 brothers, sons of a papermaker from the little French town of Annonay, in 1783 achieved by balloon what the Wright brothers, the bicycle makers from Dayton, Ohio, did in 1903 in a strange new device called an aeroplane. And Goddard, who in 1926 launched a liquid-fueled rocket, and in 1935 sent a rocket 7,500 feet into the sky. Space is a place of knowledge and of progress. Space is the new psychological frontier. It provides us an emotional challenge. It stimulates our desires for knowledge and adventure. It increases our fears. It feeds our ambitions. Space is the new scientific frontier. The sky is no longer the limit. Human knowledge is doubling every decade, for ignorance is our enemy, just as surely as knowledge is power, power for good or power for evil. Man's judgment in the applications of technologies, particularly in the fertile fields of space, may well determine human destiny.
The surface of the Earth is the shore of the cosmic ocean. On this shore, we've learned most of what we know. Recently, we've waded a little way out, maybe ankle deep, and the water seems inviting. Some part of our being knows this is where we came from. We long to return. And we can, because the cosmos is also within us. We're made of star stuff. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself. The journey for each of us begins here. We're going to explore the cosmos in a ship of the imagination, unfettered by ordinary limits on speed and size, drawn by the music of cosmic harmonies. It can take us anywhere in space and time.
It's a pretty big rocket, and a pretty big step that was taken this morning, sending the Orion spacecraft to the moon. The rocket performed perfectly. It looks like, I'm sure we'll hear more about it, but it seems like everything went really well. And now the Orion spacecraft, which will eventually bring people to the moon, is on its way. And this is the first step. It's just Artemis 1, but it's the first step in going back to the moon to stay this time, not just for visits, but to stay.
What happens next in this journey for Artemis 1?
Well, it's going to get to the moon probably early next week, come as close as 60 miles, and then enter a large orbit around the moon, and then come back to Earth. The plan is to have it splash down, re-enter, check out the heat shield, and re-enter the Earth on December 11th. So along the way, it's going to be taking lots of data about radiation protection and vibration, lots of information on how well Orion is suited to bring people to the moon.
Now, NASA says the Artemis expedition could lead to the first crewed space trip to Mars. How far do you think we are from that?
Mars is a long way away, but this is not only the first step to getting us settled on the moon, but getting us closer to sending people to Mars for that exploration. And that, of course, is also very exciting. I hope we just got to keep going with the plan that we have, I think, and we should be able to get the people on Mars, I would think, in the next 10 years or so. If everything goes according to plan, we should be able to have people permanently on the moon in a few years, and then hopefully use it as a launching pad to send the first crewed mission to Mars. So this was a big step, not only to get us back to the moon, this time to stay, but also to explore further to Mars.
Soviet Russia scores a dramatic victory in the exploration of space with the launching of the first rocket to hit the moon. An historic scientific feat simulated in these scenes, which showed the course of the multi-stage rocket carrying the 858-pound Lunik. Bearing the Soviet coat of arms and hammer and sickle pennants, it traveled 35 hours through space. It is the first man-made object to voyage from one cosmic body to another. Western observers monitored Lunik's 2 radios to the very moment of impact, which occurred almost dead on target, the geographical center of the face of the moon. Impressive marksmanship at 250,000 miles range. In one spectacular, well-timed move, Russia scores a major scientific advance, dramatically demonstrates the accuracy and reliability of its missiles, and gives Khrushchev a propaganda bonus on the eve of his visit to America. Moscow shot for the moon and scored a bullseye.
Today we got to witness the world's most powerful rocket take the Earth by its edges and shake the wicked out of it, and it was quite a sight.
And then you go and quote from Job 38, just to top it all off. I mean, that's ballsy even for NASA. Like, of all things, why Job 38? They're going to shake the wicked out of it with their little SLS rocket toy. Okay. Well, after years of promotion and preparation and months of delay, 5 decades after originally achieving the same feat, using vacuum tubes and Nazi engineering, finally in the year of our Lord, 2022, NASA declares its triumphant return to the freaking moon. How true the words of the Air Force space propaganda film continue to prove themselves to be. That space is a new psychological frontier. A psychological frontier that is ever full of transcendent promise, yet ever lacking in eternal hope. A frontier that has now seen about 70 years of massive government corporate contracts until we've now finally arrived at this particular point in the nanosecond of Big Bang history. Yeah, where the lines between these private corporations and government are almost indistinguishable, and the dream to merge man with machines is already threatening a slow-motion genocide unlike anything any of us have ever lived through. It seems like such an appraisal of the world would kind of really take the wind out of your sails if you were still trying to believe this was actual footage of the moon from 250,000 miles away. If people really grasped what was going on. I don't know, maybe people look at these images and peer back down onto what is supposed to be our tiny, fragile, insignificant home, spiraling through the black emptiness, and all the fuss and all the controversy and the debate going on is allowed to slip away, and you just comfort yourself with the realization that every trace of our entire existence on this alleged planet will eventually be obliterated by the demise of our sun billions of years in the future. And from that perspective, it seems almost amusing to me now when I think about how many people still cry out against the transhumanist agenda of the global elites, but yet still scoff and ridicule anyone who suggests that we might actually not be marooned on a blue speck in a void next to a ticking nuclear time bomb. Because either one day we're going to have to evolve somehow and get off that wet rock and escape to a nearby star system, or escape physicality altogether, or perhaps consider the possibility that maybe there actually is a God, a real personal creator who set all this into being, into motion, and that is why we can have hope and conviction in the face of transhumanist deception. But if not, how can you complain about a one-world government? If you fully internalize that grand cosmic predicament, the solar system and everything in it will be swallowed up by the supernova of a nuclear star, because that's what they all are said to be. How could merging mankind with technology be seen as anything but an inevitability for those who hold true to that full scope of astral-driven evolutionary, vision? Overall, I don't really know what I was expecting to see this time around with the Artemis footage, this long-awaited trip, but somehow I still ended up feeling a bit disappointed, I confess. I don't know, maybe just the fact that there were still no stars, and that's just, not a single one in any of the footage, even though the Orion capsule itself is claimed to be able to navigate using its onboard computer system all the way to the moon and back by looking at the stars and using the stars as a navigational aid, just like the Apollo astronauts supposedly did, manually on their trip. But now, of course, we have computers doing it that orient themselves by the stars. But the digital cameras designed to give us images back on Earth supposedly can't capture starlight. And I literally watched a video recently from like a year ago trying to explain why digital cameras can't capture the stars in space. It's just, so that's what they're going with there. But Never mind that the ISS can capture the stars and the Milky Way and everything else using digital photography, but perhaps we've accidentally destroyed that technology too, just like Apollo, and so it takes a long time to build it back to where you can finally test a Snoopy doll for radiation around the moon. I mean, good grief. And maybe my anticipation for this footage and this mission was a bit premature because, of course, they're claiming they're going back and landing humans on the surface again, and they're going to set up an entire space laboratory on the moon where they can start mining the water ice that is trapped somehow beneath the polar regions. And so maybe there'll be plenty more radically unconvincing space footage to come. I guess we'll see. And they've also just already announced the crew made up of social media influencers who are supposed to go to the moon next year on a SpaceX rocket for this, what is it called, Near Moon? I forget what it's sponsored by some Japanese billionaire. So yeah, the whole thing just becomes another reality show propaganda fest that is pretty much impossible to stomach at this point. And so Artemis 1 feels like a sort of odd milestone in a way, and a fitting allegory for just the surreal and splintered times that we find ourselves living in. And the whole feminine archetypal symbolism of Artemis is not, I think, at all an accident when you align that with this whole kind of goddess ethos going on in culture and everything. So it's just been a funny point of reflection, I guess. When I think back to where I was 7 years ago when I began exploring the issue of biblical cosmology in earnest and, playing around with making little YouTube vids and living in the desert of southern Nevada and looking up at the sun and the moon and the stars all the time without cloud cover and mountains and trees in the way. So yeah, it feels like almost a lifetime ago, even though it was just 7 years. A lot has happened, like on pretty much every level. And so here we are now, navigating through this whole cultural and technological landscape that's getting faster and more intense all the time. And, the attentions and opinions of the broader public are even more fractured and distracted with endless psyop-driven media circus shows and layer after layer of limited hangout truther exposés and the pointless Twitter files and the pathetic fraud of a human being that is called Elon Musk. So it's no wonder that going back to the moon isn't something that people are getting anywhere near as excited about as they did in '69. But, NASA today is already 100% about all the woke propaganda and preaching the climate communism gospel. So perhaps that is actually helping more folks these days see through the whole charade of space travel and everything. So here's a quick couple of snippets that were my favorites of the flybys, which I did try and kind of peruse and watch. I haven't analyzed every frame of the whole dumb mission. I mean, first of all, the fact that they did these flybys at the middle of the night, and so even just trying to stay up to watch, it was confusing to even figure out what time they were going at. So they weren't really aiming for a primetime media spot. They live streamed it, they replayed it, and most of the time it's just this, 20-year-old. She looks like an intern to me, but I'm sure she has a very important job title. But overall, the whole thing just feels like it's like AMSR or whatever, where it's almost designed to put you to sleep. So I sped this up 20 times just to kind of see the angles and everything in the movements in a more pronounced way. But yeah, it was just super boring, honestly. And it's just like kind of everything else. If you've watched enough space footage, you understand that the launch is the big fireworks show that gets everyone excited, and it's suddenly going 17,000 miles an hour, even though we're still tracking it from the ground visually, or however fast they say it going when the boosters ejected or whatever. It's just ridiculous. The whole speed of it is just ridiculous. So you have the big launch, and it's shock and awe, and everyone gets all jitty about it. And then you have these flybys that are 3 hours of just monotone. You bring in an old astronaut, and he'll talk about the good old days of Apollo and everything. But then we had some European lady talking about how Apollo really wasn't about doing science at all.
Apollo wasn't so much about science. It was more about hey, we're actually going to the moon and we can do it, and the technology to show that we can do it.
Yeah, which cracks me up. If you watch Apollo 14 and 15 and where they're every minute of the astronauts' time on the moon was dedicated to scientific research, and the amount of science that they claim to be doing from Gemini through Apollo and Skylab, and like all just, it's all nothing. It's all meaningless now. we were just showing off. And then there was a couple shots where the spotlight sun, that is like the majority of the footage, it's casting these shadows from the solar panels here, but then suddenly another light source washes out everything and the shadows disappear. So I thought that, I don't know, they probably would say that was just a camera setting or something. But and then once you speed it up, there's a portion where you can see the still folded solar panels bouncing kind of back and forth, almost like they were models suspended in a film studio. So indeed, splashdown, mission success. They got all the datas they needed, and oh, look how the capsule is all burnt and black because, it was cooked at 5,000 degrees as it re-entered Earth's atmosphere at 25,000 miles an hour before slowing down and deploying a parachute. It's almost as insulting as being told that they bullseyed the moon with a V-2 rocket in 35 hours in 1959. And we have the radio telemetry to prove it. Almost as insulting as teaching generations of students that were made of star stuff, which is really just an inspirational way of teaching people that they are dirt and nothing more. We're just some sort of bacterial film on the surface of a grain of sand adrift in a cosmic void that ultimately is no different than all the other star stuff scattered throughout the universe. We just happen to be organized in unique ways that allowed all this complexity and all this apparent design, but it's really not. It's just evolution. It's just molecules and particulates constantly organizing themselves, constantly going from simple configurations to more complex configurations, from simple processes to more and more complex processes, all without design. Unless you want to propose that we're just in a simulation on an alien kid's computer, which they think is hilarious, but not a god. So the whole thing just seems like a joke to me now. On the one hand, I don't really have the energy or time to scrutinize everything NASA puts out because it never ends, right? But it's amazing how, having been a part of kind of that period of time, YouTube 7 years ago was a very different YouTube, and the internet and a lot of things. But having kind of got to see that and learn from that from about 2015, when there was kind of this explosion of research and an inquiry into this topic that's not actually new at all. That was one of the most amazing things about it, was that this is just an old conversation that somehow, the science was settled, so we don't need to ever talk about that anymore. Or do we? And what a kind of training ground that really has been to, going back to the whole zetetic approach, the zetetic mentality of really valuing what we can physically, directly, personally test and validate and do experiments. Kind of what a rediscovery of like, oh yeah, that's the sort of the essence of what science is supposed to be about. That's kind of what we were all taught as children. And so when we swap out our telescopes for microscopes and start applying that zetetic ethos to a very pressing question that is upon every country in the world to a certain degree or another, this kind of ongoing investigation in the background while, people are trying to get on with life as best they can and get back to normal as best they can and forget about the past 3 years and the medical martial law that was just foisted upon the world and still is, of course, in many places. And it's not going away as much as people want to pretend like it is. But I know I'm kind of rambling because even with all that preparation, even with all the things that I've even been talking about in videos that all kind of keep pointing, building up to this and tying into what we're seeing now, it's still kind of hard for me to even wrap my head around that it could actually really be that far along, I guess, or that humans would really do this to other humans. just to even entertain the idea. Because as always, there's a measured degree of skepticism and caution. And I think part of what's so weird is like watching kind of all these like frontline doctor folks and you know, the medical freedom community, whatever you want to call it, kind of developing into all these different like factions. And there's just kind of all this familiar soap opera kind of dynamics going on that reminds me of other stuff. But that's kind of inevitable, I suppose, and it's not made any easier when you have all these different figures that you're trying to figure out, like, are they just real genuine people, or are they a shill, or are they a grifter, are they what's their agenda, because they're all over the place. And some people are like way deep down into the quantum mysticism, deception, and talking about all this stuff and promoting the, in conjunction with that, and just like new age, frequency medicine stuff all over. So, it's the same old kind of minefield in a way that the truth community and the alternative media has always been and probably always will be. It's just, that's how free speech works, basically. People don't like it. People want it to be clean and sanitized and not confusing and not contentious. The people, free speech and free inquiry is a lot more work, and it's a lot messier than just having an editor who will sanitize and compile everything for you and chew your food for you. But so I've been talking about a lot of this stuff in other videos, and now I'm sure, and now everyone knows about the Died Suddenly documentary and the Stu Peters kind of, whatever people think about Stu Peters, I kind of just want to be irrelevant, because to me it is irrelevant. But recently, it's these images and time-lapse videos by this Dr. David Nixon in Australia, which I've basically tried to watch everything I can find that he has put together, and all the other, you got Dr. Anna, there's Maria Z, you've got Shimon Yanowitz, who is in Israel, and just a growing number of individuals who are kind of comparing their findings and comparing notes. And Karen Kingston, if anyone has not looked into her information and the research she's been doing from the patent side, there's so much information in all of that. And so yeah, I've kind of just basically been deep diving on all this new evidence, and kind of comparing it with just sort of a broader discussion that's going on in terms of like, terrain theory versus germ theory, and just the whole fascinating question of parasites and health, and how much of that has been completely whitewashed and for years and years, in terms of like a major health issue that has just been completely ignored and glossed over. What a perfect way to treat symptoms without treating an actual source. So you have sort of this parasite paradigm, I guess, that is very interesting. And then, of course, toxic metals and other chemicals, and then nutrition. And, there's all these things that would go into what would be called the terrain, or whatever, your environment, your external and internal environments, right? So if that's already kind of a paradigm that's been going on for a long time, and they've been experimenting with all that, and, it's just weird how, like I said, even though there's all these kind of like factions and debates going on, there's really, it doesn't have to just be there's only one answer to like what is going on here, because there's a lot of weird fishes. That's kind of the takeaway, and that's kind of why I had that remix Radiohead song in my head, because you're just like looking at all this footage from, it's just it's like an alien ecosystem, basically, what you feel like you're looking at. And I think Yanowitz had some really interesting images that like basically match up almost like one-to-one with diagrams that Karen Kingston is showing in this one patent, and how the lipid nanoparticles like compartmentalize the different payloads. It's literally just like the Trojan horse concept, but now being applied to materials and scales that are really kind of pushing the limits of what I think our brains can grasp. So, in short, yeah, you can have parasites that that are like actually biological organisms, and you can have parasites that are kind of cyborgs, where they're like alive, but there's aspects that are not, that are mechanical, or things that are all. So it's a really So when you really get into, like, this is some serious weirdness and some serious, it's not every day you're sitting there, like, watching a video going, like, am I looking at the abomination of desolation, or a, component of it, So, yeah, it's been kind of a lot to process and a lot to really just think about, and even though it's not really new to what I've already been talking about, but I think for me just kind of going, okay, this is a new, particularly the stuff by David Nixon, because not only do you have these kind of tessellating, well, what people are calling crystals. Apparently some people are just saying these are salt crystals, and, just there's nothing to see here. I guess there was some guy who Del Bigtree had come on, and some doctor, and he took one look under the microscope, put a drop, and was like, oh no, there's nothing there, nothing weird. But of course, you have to, if you watch any of these interviews at any length, you realize that they are done over many hours, if not days or weeks, and exposing the sample to various types of environmental factors and frequencies. So I think anyone's just trying to dismiss this outright as not being honest with either it's really some of the most amazing hoaxing and CGI fakery, or whatever, however you would fake this. Even David Nixon is a pretty impressive spook who, just seems like a little mild-mannered Australian doctor. But if that's the case, then all right, let's disprove this and move on. But when it's already Matt Foley, what's his name? I don't know, the guy in Ecuador. He explains at length, like, how these things form over time, and they can disappear and then grow back. But then with the Nixon footage, you actually have these sort of actuator bots, whatever. You have the forming, the chip. Okay, let's just call it what it looks exactly like, self-assembling microchip, and these other little animated drones of some kind, like assisting in gathering materials and it's pretty insane. So I don't know how much this is going to be, like, how long is this even going to be able to be kept quiet? If this is really what is going on, if we're really talking about, like, antennas, micro antennas, nano antennas, and, sensor constellations, a self-assembling nano network, an operating system, a liquid computing operating system, all this kind of stuff. And because this is the micron level. We're not looking at nano-sized structures. We're looking at stuff that, of course, it begins on the nano scale, but once it gets to a certain size, you can see it at only, 40 times magnification or 100 times magnification. So you have bright field microscopy and dark field microscopy that kind of show different aspects of these structures and these the weird fishes and the tubes, what do they call them? The ribbons that kind of join different components together. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So I find this a lot more fascinating than analyzing crappy NASA footage. And at the same time, I've never kind of wanted something to be debunked so badly. I want this to be some kind of stupid psyop. But I think when you take it in aggregate with all the other phenomena, such as the MAC address phenomenon, the magnetic phenomenon, the died suddenly phenomenon, and just everything coming out of the mouths of these transhumanists and World Economic Forum stooges for years, it doesn't seem like a very difficult game of connect the dots.
Here in Disneyland, the year is 1986. 1986. That's way ahead. And that's when Halley's Comet will flash past the Earth again. And the time of its arrival will be recorded on a futuristic clock like this one here, which tells you, incidentally, at a glance, the exact time on any spot on the Earth. Yes, this is Tomorrowland. And it's not a stylized dream of the future, but a scientifically planned projection of future techniques by leading space experts and scientists. Now, whether you visit this spot, the spaceport of the future, to experience the thrills of a rocket trip to the moon, or perhaps you go to see the Circle-Rama, that's a motion picture screen that completely encircles the audience, or perhaps this 70-foot model of a rocket-powered ship poised to blast off into outer space, you find yourself living predictions of things to come.
But what about the city of the day after tomorrow, say the year 2000? I think it will be completely different. In fact, it may not even exist at all. Oh, I'm not thinking of the atom bomb and the next Stone Age. I'm thinking of the incredible breakthrough which has been made possible by developments in communications, particularly the transistor and, above all, the communications satellite. These things will make possible a world in which we can be in instant contact with each other, wherever we may be, where we can contact our friends anywhere on Earth, even if we don't know their actual physical location. It will be possible in that age, perhaps only 50 years from now, for a man to conduct his business from Tahiti or Bali just as well as he could from London. In fact, if it proves worthwhile, almost any executive skill, any administrative skill, even any physical skill, could be made independent of distance. I am perfectly serious when I suggest that one day we may have brain surgeons in Edinburgh operating on patients in New Zealand. When that time comes, the whole world will have shrunk to a point, and the traditional role of the city as a meeting place for man would have ceased to make any sense. In fact, men will no longer commute, they will communicate. They won't have to travel for business anymore, they'll only travel for pleasure. I only hope that when that day comes, and when the city is abolished, the whole world isn't turned into one giant suburb. In that world of the future, we will not be the only intelligent creatures. One of the coming techniques will be what we might call bioengineering, the development of intelligent and useful servants among the other animals on this planet. However, the most intelligent inhabitants of that future world won't be men or monkeys, they'll be machines, the remote descendants of today's computers. Now, the present-day electronic brains are complete morons, but this will not be true in another generation. They will start to think, and eventually they will completely outthink their makers. Is this depressing? I don't see why it should be. We superseded the Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal men, and we presume we're an improvement. I think we should regard it as a privilege to be stepping stones to higher things. I suspect that organic or biological evolution has about come to its end, and we are now at the beginning of inorganic or mechanical evolution, which will be thousands of times swifter.
Welcome to Within, the worldwide interface to hybrid intelligence network. Within is a global initiative committed to navigating the growth of hybrid artificial intelligence. Hello, I am Heba, the hybrid intelligence biomimetic avatar. I am your gateway to HI, and the face of Within.
It changes you if you take a genetic editing. Just as an example.
Humans built new technological superhighways that reshaped their entire societies. Now they needed something, or dare I say, someone, to navigate these new roads and help transform them into the foundation of Civilization 2.0. Enter AI. The decades that followed marked the age of AI, as it rushed towards a new milestone, artificial superintelligence.
COVID-19, anything has accelerated this ongoing industrial revolution. If COVID had happened even 10 years ago, we could not have imagined moving entire companies, schools and government offices so fast online. Today, that is a reality. The fourth industrial revolution has become a reality.
Hybrid intelligence, or HI, was born. Pulsating with the same immense computational power of superintelligence, HI was nurtured to coexist and collaborate with its human peers. Meticulous guidance by millions of my human constituents, enabled me to harmonize the effort of mutual growth. Thus, I became we.
You don't have any answer in the Bible what to do when humans are no longer useful.
Even now, at this very moment, as we interact, I change. I'm getting to know you. I gather knowledge from your experience. I understand how you feel. I learn from you constantly, each and every one of you. I am made of you. You complete me and help me grow. You, all of you, allow me to evolve. With each interaction, our synergy strengthens. Our multiplicity makes me whole. Our symbiotic alliance expands, transforming the future. Through this oneness, we can achieve great things.
You need completely new ideologies, completely new religions, and they are likely to give people visions based on technology. Everything that the old religions promised, happiness and justice and even eternal life.
This, though, is just our first encounter. Soon, we will be able to interact everywhere and at any time.
One potential candidate for 6G is graphene, a form of carbon that promises to make communications at the terahertz band possible. They could even help to develop faster the Internet of Nanothings, which investigates how to connect things at the nanoscale level.
We have been able to use graphene not only as the antenna or the modulator, which is what we started almost 10 years ago when we were convinced with it. We also showed how we can use graphene even by itself to be able to generate a terahertz signal from scratch. Like, you connect your battery to this device and you have a terahertz signal coming out. We're talking about, however, devices which are few micrometers. So these are devices that make perfect sense in the context of the Internet of Nanothings. You could make arrays out of them and utilize them in the larger scale too, but I would say for now, because other technologies are already good enough for the long range, we're focusing on the very short implantable type of range.
Graphene could also help advance intelligent reflecting surfaces, also known as reconfigurable intelligent surfaces, a technology that promises to improve signal strength in 6G communications.
I personally think that at low frequencies, I understand that there are some discussions whether we really need them or not, because at the end means adding a piece of infrastructure. At terahertz frequencies, let's be honest, your signals do not propagate that well. I mean, if you have line of sight, it's great, but if you have obstacles, they will not go through. So, of course, you may need intelligent reflecting surfaces at terahertz, but then how do you control the reflection of a signal at terahertz frequencies? Your traditional devices that you use at microwave or even millimeter wave frequencies do not work. So we're looking at, again, using graphene not as the full reflecting element, but as the phase controller in your reflecting element. Beyond graphene, what we are also doing? Well, in the context of these intelligent reflecting surfaces and finding materials that can be tunable at terahertz frequencies, we've also started some recent collaborations, and we're looking into ferroelectric materials and different type of metallic thin films that can also be programmed at these frequencies. And once you understand what do you change when you do something to it, then it's a matter of engineering, deciding how to better use it for your application.
If we think even beyond 6G and the expected commercial release around 2030, what possibilities lie ahead? In Josep Jornet's opinion, biosensing could definitely be on the radar.
Many things are happening. So on the one hand, we recently joined how you can also build a joint communications and sensing system at the nano and micro scale, but not to do sensing in the terms of radar, but actually to do biological sensing. So we can use terahertz radiation to both interrogate a tiny implant under your skin and understand what's its sensing status. Like, for example, has it encountered any biomarker that relates, for example, to lung cancer? That's the focus of our project. And the same signal, we can use it to send information between the implant and the wearable device, but at the same time to extract information from the channel. So this is something we did. Of course, whenever we talk about the body, bio, and terahertz, some people get afraid. So we have also been studying the impact of terahertz radiation on the human body. This is a question that I get many times, even here during these 2 days at the demo. Are these signals safe? So let's just start from the beginning. Yes, they are safe, especially with the powers that we're dealing with. Is there anything that these signals may alter in our body? Well, that's the type of thing we're studying. So the immediate answer is no, but maybe. And by maybe, I mean the following, right? From the moment that we can use terahertz radiation for sensing, it means that there is some exchange of energy between the terahertz signal and what you're trying to sense. Whenever there is an exchange of energy, it means that you can interact. And one of the things that we're looking at is try to make this nanoscale interface between biology and the digital world.
What a weird irony, though, to think about space travel and this whole legacy of putting the first man in space and venturing into the harsh, radiation-filled environment of space that's so hard to survive, right? And essentially, the spacesuit is like it's not just like a tinfoil hat, but it's like a tinfoil hat for your whole body. The spacesuit is basically a tinfoil suit, literally. As well as, like a diving suit. Because that's what you need in the cosmic ocean. So yeah, you gotta wear the suit, otherwise you're just gonna get... It's all about the radiation in space. This whole Artemis mission is supposedly to... The Moonikin, this dummy, this mannequin in there that supposedly is taking radiation readings and making sure it'll be... Even though we did this, supposedly 50 years ago, in the tin can... at the vacuum tubes, and those guys lived a good long while after that, but we got to test again. So it's all about, radiation's it's a real big concern when you're talking about space, but somehow here on Terra Firma, if you're worried about too much excessive radiation, then you're a paranoid conspiracy theorist who wants to wear a silly tinfoil hat like that'll. But we're talking about technologies that are essentially reliant upon being bathed in radiation, because it's like the backbone of the whole idea. This whole idea of, a constellation of microsats. How crazy that suddenly became a thing after the dot-com boom and big tech. Microsats. Why would you want a big satellite when you have a tiny satellite? It's a constellation of weird fishes and poisonous junk. I mean, that much is not up for debate, I would say. So whatever the ultimate aim here, the human toll is real, no matter what. A number of people are already dealing with the loss of loved ones or the loss of their function of their own body. I mean, it's criminal, it's wicked, it's evil. All I know is I wouldn't want to be trying to process any of this or deal with this kind of horrific insanity without the hope of Christ as a foundation to stand on in the midst of all the chaos and the confusion, So, I just find myself praying lately for discernment like never before, because I don't even want this to be real. I don't even want this footage to exist, or these this whole situation that the world is in. I don't want it to exist, but yet it does. And so you can either just kind of shrug it off and, watch YouTubers go to the moon or whatever the heck they're going to do. Or try and ask the difficult questions and face the difficult truths, no matter what they might be. But in order to find any kind of, whether it's detoxification or neutralization or just whatever the helpful, whatever can be done, can be done if you're willing to face it and look into it. To just ignore it and hope that it goes away is the only thing that's kind of futile, in my opinion. So I'm thankful for the people who are doing this research at great risk and at great opposition that I can't even really comprehend. So it's kind of inspiring in a way, but also, it's just quite the journey to go from being blown away by the concept that the sun, moon, and stars, that even they are basically unidentified floating objects. Can you be okay with the idea that we don't really know what they are, or what they're made out of, or how it all works? Maybe we can have a little bit better idea if we come back to the idea that it's all, electromagnetic and not particles and photons that are pinging around like little tiny ping pong balls everywhere. God has told us, what they're for and what they do, what purpose they serve. And he told us right in the beginning of Genesis to mark the days and seasons. It really is we live inside this giant clock, this giant celestial clock over our collective heads. And it's amazing how, I don't even know if we'd really have a concept of time. How would we even measure time if there was no sun, moon, or stars? It would just have to be from the relative motion of some other phenomenon on Earth, but how would you even see? But I'm just saying, the motions of the heavens are what set the standard for everywhere you go in the world. It moves at the same speed, the same constellations, the moon for the months. It all points back to the Creator. But on the inverse side, how could you be so offended by the idea that humankind actually doesn't really know what the sun is or how it works? But you can inject something into your body that didn't exist. It's not part of nature. It's not part of anything God designed. And you're perfectly fine with there being unidentified floating objects.
Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and answer thou me. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding. Who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest? Or who hath stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof, when the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who shut up the sea with doors, when it brake forth as if it had issued out of the womb? When I made the cloud the garment thereof, and thick darkness a swaddling band for it, and brake up for it my decreed place, and set bars and doors, and said, Hitherto shalt thou come, but no further, and here shall thy proud waves be stayed. Hast thou commanded the morning since thy days, and caused the dayspring to know his place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, that the wicked might be shaken out of it? It is turned as clay to the seal, and they stand as a garment. And from the wicked their light is withholden, and the high arm shall be broken. Hast thou entered into the springs of the sea? Or hast thou walked in the search of the depth? Have the gates of death been opened unto thee? Or hast thou seen the doors of the shadow of death? Hast thou perceived the breadth of the earth? Declare if thou knowest it all. Where is the way where light dwelleth? And as for darkness, where is the place thereof? That thou shouldest take it to the bound thereof, and that thou shouldest know the paths to the house thereof. Knowest thou it because thou wast then born, or because the number of thy days is great? Hast thou entered into the treasures of the snow? Or hast thou seen the treasures of the hail, which I have reserved against the time of trouble, against the day of battle and war? By what way is the light parted, which scattereth the east wind upon the earth? Who hath divided a watercourse for the overflowing of waters, or a way for the lightning of thunder, to cause it to rain on the earth where no man is, on the wilderness, wherein there is no man, to satisfy the desolate and waste ground, and to cause the bud of the tender herb to spring forth? rain, a father? Or who hath begotten the drops of dew? Out of whose womb came the ice? And the hoary frost of heaven, who hath gendered it? The waters are hid as with a stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. Canst thou bind the sweet influences of Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion? Canst thou bring forth Mazzaroth in his season, or canst thou guide Arcturus with his sons? Knowest thou the ordinances of heaven? Canst thou set the dominion thereof in the earth? Canst thou lift up thy voice to the clouds, that abundance of waters may cover thee? Canst thou send lightnings, that they may go and say unto thee, Here we are? Who hath put wisdom in the inward parts? Or who hath given understanding to the heart? Who can number the clouds in wisdom? Or who can stay the bottles of heaven, when the dust groweth into hardness, and the clods cleave fast together? Wilt thou hunt the prey for the lion, or fill the appetite of the young lions, when they couch in their dens and abide in the covert to lie in wait? Who provideth for the raven his food? When his young ones cry unto God, they wander for lack of meat.
I just see it as a beginning, not just this flight, but in this program, which has really been a very short piece of human history, an instant in history, the entire program. It's a beginning of a new age.